Okay, so I'm actually really excited about this particular Power Automate video. Again, this is along the series of Power Platform and what you can do with the various technologies that make up the Power Platform, this low code, no code technology. And when you come to Power Automate, this is really the Power Automate series, you're going to encounter these reusable scenarios, or these scenarios where you need to reuse a flow or a process for several different reasons. And in this particular video, we're going to cover what is the best design, or what is the technical architecture or the solution architecture to really promote reusability. Now, with these flows, they're super easy to create, but every now and then we encounter a couple of scenarios to where we want to reuse that existing flow without having to replicate or duplicate that same business logic or functionality in multiple flows. And this concept really came to surface in several reasons. One was you don't have that concept of a global workflow or a site level workflow to where, that we're used to with SharePoint Designer, to where you can create the workflow and then any library or list that needs to leverage that workflow, it can trigger that workflow from within that library. You don't have that concept in Power Automate. So on the inverse, what you kind of have to create is that you create this flow, and then any other like high level flow or top level flow that need to interact with that child flow, which is I think a term that I saw in the community, is, you need a way to trigger that. And there's several tips and tricks around that. And triggering a child flow only gets you so far, and they kind of remove that action from the Power Automate, even though you can trigger it with an HTTP trigger in the event. So that's one reason. So one reason why we want to focus on this pattern that I want to show you is that you have a sense of reusability, right? So someone did the heavy lift of creating this very complex flow, and other scenarios you want to leverage that same flow, and you don't want to duplicate the functionality. So we're going to cover the pattern that covers that. The other one would be for a common process. Again, we don't have this concept of a global flow or a site level flow to where, if you have, say for example, you have a contract approval process, and you may have 20 libraries within the site, or maybe 20 libraries across the tenant that need to trigger the same contract approval flow. Are you going to really create that same logic 20 times for each one of those instances or libraries that need it? And the answer should be no. And the question is, well, how do you do that and keep all of that encapsulated? So I'm going to show you this pattern that solves for that. The other one would be premium connectors. We know that we try to avoid premium connectors because of this exponential cost that it could have on the organization. And we, as responsible app makers or responsible developers, we want to create these solutions to where we're either fitting within the existing prescription or subscription, licensing model that our company already is paying for. And we don't want to create a scenario to where, like, I just created this awesome flow, but guess what? It's now going to cost the organization $20 per user per month to use this flow. How awesome is that? And you're eating that into the company's bottom line, their company's profit. So how do you design a flow when you absolutely need premium connectors in your solution? How do you design it in a way to where it can scale in the most cost-effective way? This pattern is going to cover that. And lastly, you're going to have a scenario where you're going to need a service account. Think about all the integration pieces or points that we talked in the previous video, right? So you notice how, we're making SQL on-prem calls, or we're making calls to ServiceNow, we're making calls to Salesforce, we're making calls or interacting with SAP. All of that integration requires premium connectors. So what most organizations would do, they would create a pattern or a best practice to say, we're going to have these 5 or 6 service accounts, and we're going to license them up to the roof. We're going to give them all the needed licenses needed to process these batch processes, or to process these, what quote unquote, hint, spoiler alert, microservices, to where they can execute those and you create them in a way to where it's cost effective and the service account is primed or responsible for that type of integration. So as an example, and of course you can design this any way that you want. Every organization is going to be different. Every organization is going to have their own requirement. But imagine that you have a service account integrating with ServiceNow. So that service account is going to be given the needed access to do read operations or read and write operations to ServiceNow. You may have a separate service account for Salesforce and a separate service account for an on-prem SQL instance, so on and so forth. So you separating these by the platform or the enterprise solution that they integrate with. Now, when you have a service account, now watch this, because I know you guys are probably battling this already, or you figured out a way around it. But when you get the service account, the one thing that as a responsible information security, cyber aware, or just being smart, right? You don't want to share those service account credentials with every app maker. So how do you build that process in a way that, oh, you want to integrate with Salesforce? How do you design that in a way to where app makers who need that integration, you're not giving them service account credentials. You're not granting their personal account that Salesforce or that ServiceNow or that, whatever, that type of integration. You're not granting them access, kind of open up this mushroom of potential problems. Okay, so I think hopefully I made the case of why this pattern is super important and the different scenarios on why you would do it. So let's take a look at the whiteboard. So if I look over here, in this empty, beautiful space, here's the trick, here's the secret sauce of the pattern that you want to employ. Now, what we're going to do, it all starts with a SharePoint list, as all my solutions do. I love SharePoint. I love SharePoint lists and libraries and things along those lines because they keep me under the standard licensing. Okay, so here we have a SharePoint list. And what we're going to do is leverage the fact that SharePoint can trigger a Power Automate, right? So here I have my Power Automate, and let's just say this is my ServiceNow integration. All right, so let me give this a label. So that's my ServiceNow, and this is going to be my Power Automate. Now this Power Automate, once triggered, will create a ServiceNow ticket, right? Now, if you ever created a function in any language, the core concept of a function is the implementation of that function is a black box. It's encapsulated. You don't need to know how the function does what it do. All you need to know is that if I want this function to execute this type of command, because it supports it, right? A function, let me back up. A function is inner workings, its implementation is a black box. You shouldn't care how it gets the work done, just the fact that it gets it done. A function will also define what capabilities it will do. And which one of those 2 or 3, 4, 5, or whatever the case may be, capabilities that it will execute or behaviors it will execute or respond to will be dependent on the parameters passed to that function, right? So say, for example, let's just kind of go through a brief example. So let's just say that I need this Power Automate to create a ticket, and that ticket requires I give it the ticket a title, I have to give it a category, and I probably want to have the assigned to, right? And let's just, to be fair, you may have several different types of tickets, right? So if it's category 1, you got to provide field 1, field 2, field 3. If it's category 2, you had to provide, XYZ, a description, whatever, right? So password resets would be, the title is the password reset, the category is password reset, assigned to, maybe you don't need to specify the assigned to in that scenario. Okay, so these are the parameters that it would take. And then you may have like 4 or 5 optional parameters, and that will depend on the category if those optional parameters are needed or not. Now, the way that you would do this, and I'm coining this as the Power Automate microservice, right? Because microservices are just like functions, but you do it in the form of a service, right? So you have an API, you call this service, you pass it the parameters, you send it to JSON or the query string, wherever the case may be. Based on those values and what you pass in it, it will respond with certain behaviors and it will execute a set of instructions that are black box, right? So this is exactly what we want to do. So for this service now, let me just call this the snow ticket, right? And I may have this ticketing, I don't know. You can figure out the different scenarios. All right. So once that snow ticket, what's going to happen is that you're going to pass it a title. You're going to select a category, and this could be a choice column. That's why I love the SharePoint list, right? Because what I'm doing is using these site columns in the list as parameters to my function, and then based on the values that you pass, the Power Automate will be smart enough to say, oh, you got this category, so run this routine. Oh, you selected this category, so run this routine. And when I run this routine, I'm expecting title, description, start date, due date, XYZ, right? So all of that's going to be encapsulated in this Power Automate, and it's reusable, and you're not duplicating that logic in 20 or 30, 40 different Power Automates. Okay, let's keep going. Let's keep going. So here we have my title, my description, category, my category, and now I have my description. And then based off of that, this Power Automate knows that for the selected category, this is the title, this is the description. It would then use that service account that's tied to that particular ServiceNow connector and create that ticket in Snow, right? Again, we're leveraging the Snow enterprise platform. We're not trying to replace the functionality that Snow provides, but we do want to create this type of integration to it, right? So here, you pass this information when the item is created. This Power Automate gets triggered, and then from that Power Automate, it creates the Snow ticket. Fantastic, right? So this is the meat of it, and this is the basic pattern, right? So this is in many different scenarios on how you want to, and I'm going to show you some other examples, but in many different scenarios, this is the core, this is the common denominator pattern that you can use. And again, this is what I'm coining as, this is the Deshaun Clark term, the Power Automate microservices. Okay, let's keep going. Here, so how would this work in practice? So in practice, let's zoom out so you get the big picture. This Snow ticket creator is going to be the name of that Power Automate. And we're going to do, and this is going to be the Snow ticket creator microservice. All right, so let's come up with a naming convention. All of our microservices will be prefixed with MS underscore, right? So that's going to be the microservice, right? So if you see a MS underscore, that means that Power Automate is a microservice. You find the list that it responds to where you can pass in your parameters, and then it will execute what you need it to execute. Now, how does this work? So, okay, so imagine that we created this help desk ticketing system, right? So we have so help desk ticketing system sound like we're replacing Snow. Let's look at something like, okay, got it. We have, we're doing a equipment refresh, right? This is our third year for recycling laptops or whatever, right? So here we say, okay, if you want a new laptop, fill out this Power App, which is much better and user-friendly than filling out a Snow ticket, right? Because most of the time it's like, what Snow ticket do I create? Do I recreate, this type of request or this, is it an issue? Is it a ticket? Is it a request? Is, whatever. Snow has its own jargon and nomenclature, whatever. So we're going to simplify this, right? And just say, you know what? Just create this Power App. Fill out this Power App. And once you fill out this Power App, I'm going to gather the needed information from you. The Power App is smart. It knows exactly who you are, so I'm not asking for your name, email, or phone number or anything like that, unless, I need alternates to that. And once that Power App is filled out, it's going to go to a SharePoint list, not our Snow ticket SharePoint list. This is my SharePoint list dedicated to this particular request, right? Okay, so once we do that, when this item is created, it writes to this SharePoint list. Then my Power Automate targeted to this equipment request will kind of do its thing, right? The first thing I probably want to do, hold on, let me label these. First thing I want to do is send my requester a confirmation email. Yep, we got all your information. We'll be in touch. Thank you so much. And then what I'm going to do is simply create a new item. Let me zoom out here. Simply create a new item into this list, right? So now I'm going to create a new item into my snow ticket microservice, and that's very trivial, right? So this is how you guys should start building out your Power Automate. Once you kind of get through your 101 phase, right? Because there's layers to this Power Platform game. Once you get to your level 1 phase, and then level 2, you start to build more complex Power Automate instances or solutions, cherry picked or whatever. And then once you kind of graduate to that level 3, now you really have to start considering things from an enterprise perspective and really try to minimize your footprint, minimize your common logic into these Power Automate microservices, right? So as you can see, all of this work, the magic is in this guy here. So regardless of how many different scenarios to where I want to create a snow ticket, I can do all this front end heavy lift to make that process unique to whatever I'm doing. So this is going to be the equipment request process. I may have another process for parking validation, or maybe I want to reserve, I have to schedule or I have to reserve or buy a parking spot within the organization. Again, that may be a snow request because, again, we want to monitor and document and audit all these different types of requests, and you can just submit that. Another one that's probably more relevant would be a change tracking request. And understand that snow cannot accommodate all different scenarios, but these business applications and these business solutions can cover the scenario for that particular instance for that particular department, right? So a change request, that could be a coding request for the digital team. They may have a different set of forms that they want to create, and they probably want to have a notification to different departments or app owners or directors or product owners and all this other good stuff. And then only until they approve it will the snow request get created. So now I can have this change request, again, fill out this form, and once you hit submit, save that into my SharePoint list, right? And then now this particular request, this particular change request, again, change requests can come in many different flavors and sizes, but this particular change request, I need to get 3 levels of approval, right? So you fill out the form, I drop it in the list, I send the confirmation to the submitter, and then based on the category selected, I'm looking for approval from group 1, group 2, group 3. Once I get all 3 of those approvals, then and only then will I create a record within my snow ticket request to generate the snow ticket, and then that will have a downstream of impact based on the ticket that's created to make sure that that change request is audited, right? So we talked about snow. What about Salesforce? It's the exact same scenario. So what you're going to do, you're going to come in here. Let me find some space so I can draw. You're going to come in here. And then these microservices usually do not have a form on the interface. They usually just start with a SharePoint list that's going to be like the parameters. It's going to trigger this Power Automate, right? And then that Power Automate is going to create or update a contact within Salesforce, right? And now all I have to do is get the information inside this SharePoint list. And I can even get more sophisticated in the sense that the columns where I absolutely need values, I'm going to make those required fields. So you can't create an item in this SharePoint list unless you complete the required fields, right? The options that you have, I'm going to make those choice columns, because once you're in Power Automate and you want to create a record into this SharePoint list, those categories are going to be finite, and it's going to force you to choose against a category. And those categories are going to respond to the different behaviors or actions this Power Automate integrated with Salesforce is designed to do, right? So you can really have control over your parameters, so to speak. Again, speaking in the way of a function, you have control of those parameters. Let's look at something a little bit more low level, maybe not as sophisticated as a enterprise solution integration. Let's look at something as simple as email. It all starts with a SharePoint list. This is my email solution, which is going to trigger my Power Automate. That's going to have all the magic behind it. And what this is going to do is create this really elaborate corporate branded email that that's built off an HTML template. I mean, we're talking logos, we're talking, branded, we're talking the disclaimer at the bottom. And you can use this to email out to customers and clients or vendors and suppliers where branding is really, really important. Or you can have this as internal communication. But understand, if you ever created an email in Power Automate, and it's not that it's complex, but an HTML template, it could be tedious. And you don't want to create that every time you need to send a branded email. And this parameter is very, very basic. We all have it, right? Let me show you how flexible this is. So obviously, when you send an email, what do you have in the email? Subject. Exactly. So I have the subject of the email. Come on, you got to participate. That's how this thing syncs, right? So I'm going to send the subject of the email. What else? What are parameters we have for email? You guessed it. Body. The body of the email, right? What else? The to, who you're sending the email to, right? And if I want to keep this service for internal only, when you say to, I'm going to lock that down to a people field to further restrict you to only selecting people within the organization, right? So now you can, as you can see, you can have to, you can have carbon copy, you can have BCC, and so forth. Now, here's the flexibility piece of it. Not only do you have the basic fundamentals that you have for sending the email, you also can send attachments, right? And with the attachment, all we're going to do is use the attachment field within the SharePoint list. And this could be a one or many, which is a beautiful thing and very, very flexible, right? So you pass me these parameters that are needed to send this email, and based off of these, and I can now have another category, like maybe what's the severity or the priority you want me to set to it. Is it low, medium, or high? And I can set that as a category. And in my Power Automate, I will be smart enough to, based on the priority category selected, to flag it as such when we send those out, right? So as you can see, this Power, again, say it with me, Power Automate microservices can save you a ton of time. It promotes consistency. It promotes security, right? Because now you're not sharing your service account with other app makers within the organization, which is a no-no, right? And then also it promotes reusability, because what you're doing, someone's going to be tasked with the heavy lift with integrating with ServiceNow, the heavy lift with integrating with Salesforce, the heavy lift with integrating with SAP. We don't want to have to do that every time we need that type of integration. Start thinking of in the concept, or start thinking of down the avenue of, excuse me, a little tongue-tied tonight. Start thinking of down the avenue of microservices. How can you build this in an enterprise way to where you can reuse it and other app makers can take advantage of it? Now, you can take this to a whole nother level, right? Now you can create because we're already creating our Power Platform resource site where app makers go to get the latest on governance, the latest on best practices, and peer-to-peer help, and training, and webinars, and seminars, and all these other things that, industry seminars, and the one that's coming up for Microsoft Business Solutions and Business Applications. So we already have that resource site. And from that resource site, you can now leverage that to catalog the various microservices that exist within the organization. And you make it open source, not open source as in the industry, but open source within the organization. Microservices don't have to come from one particular group, the IT group. It can be anyone, any app maker in the organization. right? Because you're going to have an app maker who's very intimate and knowledgeable with your HRIS system. You have someone else who's going to be knowledgeable and intimate with Azure DevOps or, Snow and all the other examples I use. So allow this to be a space to where if you build something cool that's reusable and now you have a pattern on how to make it reusable, you can catalog and post them there. And if you build it right, maybe you do, one SharePoint page per microservice. Now the SharePoint page has a commenting system, and now the developer can give feedback, or if people have questions on, well, how do I use it for X? In the comment section, you can help each other out. Hopefully this was very helpful. But yeah, this is a game changer. And again, all of this takes is a lot of, one, knowing how to put these together, two, your creativity, and three, it's just practice and experience. So, the practice and experience will come over time. But anyway, let me know what you think about this Power Automate microservices. Leave it in the comments and let me know your feedback on this one. Until then, I'll see you tomorrow.